years is that, reading about it, that generation is going to have the most influential generation, the most influential of the future of not just America, but in our Buddhist world, okay, BCA. And that's why when I heard Dr. Erik Hammerstrom he was talking at the Northwest Conference, he did a workshop on that, and I found it so intriguing to understand how they think, and I found out how different you guys are. And you just had your Techno Buddha, and I really enjoyed every minute of it, and all you've done, all your creativity. But you're different. You're so much different from what we think in our values as baby boomers. But you guys have the most influential, influence of our future. And so that's why I have Dr. Erik Hammerstrom here to talk about that, okay? So I heard about it. I think he gives some insight of how to prepare ourselves, okay, to be safe as well as our own families, how we look at our families. Let me give you a background. He's associate professor of East Asian comparative religion at Pacific Lutheran University, Tacoma, Washington. Has a PhD in religious Buddhist studies from Indiana University, MA in religious Asian religion, University of Hawaii, a BA concentrating on Asian religious poetry from Sarah Lawrence College in 1997. He grew up in Oregon in Aloha, Oregon. Never heard of that. He got involved in Buddhism in high school. Jewish parents got interested in Zen, and also studied Buddhism in college, and that captivated his interest. And he went at the same time with Dr. Jeff Wilson from IDS, even though they didn't know each other. And so he considered becoming a monk, but instead became a scholar instead. So his academic research focused on basically modern Chinese Buddhism. He wrote 2 books, Science of Chinese Buddhism, Early 20th Century Engagement, and he's also a second book about the Huan School in modern China. He and his wife are temple members of Tacoma Buddhist Temple, and now he's studying. He's now becoming a minister's an MA, and also he's currently enrolled in a CBE correspondence course. So basically, he is really his focus is Jodo Shinshu Buddhism now, but also too is I really appreciate his pioneering. Just by coincidence, he was just studying some research at Cal Berkeley here, and we're very fortunate to have him connect. So without further ado, I'll have Erik give your presentation. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Now, let's see. I might be a little too tall for this, but I'll put on my teacher voice. Thank you, President Tanimoto. Ken, thank you, Ken. All right, well then that's going to be how this rolls. In the Northwest we're also kind of informal, so I want to thank you, Ken. I want to thank Reverend Kuwahara, Edith, Judy, everyone who's kind of helped me feel comfortable here. This is my first visit to the Jodo Shinshu Center. It's a great place. It really feels like something special. As someone who spent a lot of time in Buddhist institutions, both in the US and in Asia, there is definitely kind of a feeling here of being within Buddhism. As Ken said, my academic research specialty is Chinese Buddhism, but I teach college-age students, and most of those students are in their late teens, early 20s. Should we give this a second and see if it could be my Chromebook. As Ken said, I've been involved with Buddhism since I was in high school. I spent quite a while doing Zen practice, and after moving to Tacoma to take the job that I now hold at Pacific Lutheran University, I started to attend the Tacoma Buddhist Temple and became a member. So Buddhism in the United States is something I've been involved with a long time, and it's something I think a lot about. Also, because I teach mostly people who are 19, 20, 21, 22, I think about those two things together. As a professor, as a teacher of mostly young people, we do have non-traditional age students in our classes, but still majority of our students at PLU are that 18 to 22-year-old range. I kind of have this sense that they get a bad rap. So for those of you who are in that age range, if there are any of you that young, I think that there is sometimes a bad rap. There's a kind of misunderstanding that happens sometimes by people of my age, people who are older, of what millennials in particular face. And so this workshop, this speech, this talk that I created was created for the Northwest Convention, which we had just a couple months ago. And I gave it to a room of, I think it was like 100 people probably, mostly older, longtime Temple members, but there was a mixture, including a couple people who are here. So I hope you'll bear with the repetition from what I said then. So today, let me talk about what I'm going to say. I'm going to talk about a couple things. Mostly I'm going to focus on the millennial generation, right? And this is defined differently. The edges of the millennial generation are kind of fuzzy, but basically we can say they're born in the 1980s and 1990s. This is now the largest generation in the US. So this is a very important group in terms of the future. And there's a lot of interesting things about this group. 43% identify as persons of color, right? So this is a big shift that's happening in the US in terms of people's self-identity, especially around ethnicity, race, but there are other markers of diversity as well. So this is who I'm going to be talking about. If you fall into this category, I'm probably not going to tell you anything that's going to be a big shock to you. You're probably going to say, yeah, this is my experience. Hopefully, if I did my job right. And if I didn't, there's going to be plenty of time at the end for you to say, or to provide your observations. One thing that I mentioned at the Northwest Convention was that a big thing that people of my generation, older, we need to do is to listen. That's a big part of what is required, is listening to what younger people are saying, what they need, what they see, what they understand. And so that will also be part of this at the end here. So we'll have a nice time for conversation at the end. Hopefully what I say here sparks some things, sparks some ideas within you, and we can talk about it. So here's the structure of today's talk. I'm going to give a little background on what we know about the millennials. In particular, I want to focus on the economic context that millennials live within, because it is very different from the context of the baby boomers. This is really important. Also, the cultural context. Again, very different from the context that the baby boomers grew up in and older generations, and even different from myself. I'm 42. 2017. Yeah, I'm 42. I'll be 43 later this year. So I'm not a millennial. I'm Gen X, I guess. From talking about the background, the forces that are acting on the millennials, I'll talk a little bit about millennial attitudes toward religion and toward kind of things in general. And then there's a discussion at the end. I will only say a couple things about the challenges. I think I'm relatively new to the BCA. I'm not new to Buddhism in America, but I am new to the particular part of Buddhism in America that is the BCA. And so I won't claim to understand the particular challenges facing the BCA better than I would guess just about everybody in this room. So at that point, it will be your opportunity to kind of talk about what you see, what you think, what you hope, and what you dream for the future. As I go through this talk, there are going to be two Buddhist themes that are going to animate it. First, conditioned arising. Things do not just appear on their own, right? We are Buddhists, we know this, right? Things only arise when there are proper causes and conditions. So if we want to understand why a generation displays certain attitudes, we can think about what are the conditions, what are the causes that give rise to those attitudes. So that's going to be one theme. And the other theme, which I think is a theme that any religious organization in the United States has to be thinking about is impermanence, given trends in religion in the United States, outside, including Buddhism, but across the board. The question of impermanence. So these are two Buddhist themes that will animate this talk. All right, so conditioned arising. Let's talk about economics. So this is a little bit like data heavy. I can, if you're interested, I can point you some various resources for some of these data points. Some of it comes from the Pew Forum, some of it comes from census data from the US government, and there's other studies and so forth. But in general, they all kind of agree roughly on the following picture. But I want to frame that first by asking all of you, where were you at age 29? If you're not 29, where do you hope to be in these kind of categories? Do you expect to be married? Were you married at 29? Do you expect to be married at 29? Did you have a house, right, and mortgage payments at 29? Do you expect that? Do you hope that? Do you not even hope that for yourself? Long-term job, retirement fund, or pension. A pension, you might have to look it up if you're at a certain age, right? Because this is something that has been disappearing from American life, is the pension. Health insurance. I'm not going to go too much into it given what's happened today, right? This is a moving thing. But these are questions. So I'm going to ask you to take just a moment to reflect on your life. Where were you at 29 in relation to these things? Or where do you hope to be? Where do you reasonably think you might get to at 29? Some of you, this might be a little while ago, so you might be kind of thinking back a ways to when you were 29. So that's the frame. I want you to think about that, because the experiences of people who are in their 60s and 70s are radically different from people who are currently approaching 29 but aren't there yet. One of the factors that is very real is declining income by generation. In the past 25 years, there's been a 20% decline in income for people who are 25. So if you were 25 years ago, what you made in adjusted dollars was 20% higher than what someone who is 25 today makes. And this is both in the United States. There's also been an economist working at the University of Waterloo, where Jeff Wilson also is, who studied Canada, and Canada follows much the same pattern. So this is something to be aware of. If you are in that age group, if you have children in that age group, if you have grandchildren in that age group, this is a very real thing. Income is declining in the US. There has also been a rise in temporary, part-time, unpaid, think internships, right? The kind of pay to play, right? You've got to have an internship to get a paying job, but that means you've got to have support while you have that unpaid internship. This has all been rising. A number of years ago, I saw a lot of articles about how millennials are into the gig economy and they can't commit. I would flip that around and say the economy is not committing to millennials. Right? This is the situation. And so you have a generation which is making less money and is less stable in terms of the employment they do have. And in light of that, education is a must. In 2015, so this is 2 years ago, if you were college educated, the unemployment rate was 7.2%. And underemployment, which is people saying they want to work more hours or make a better salary commensurate with their education level, was 15%. And if you were not college educated, it's much bleaker. 20% unemployment for non-college educated people in 2015. So people understand this, right? Education it's not an option anymore. It's a must. If you can get more education, you will. And this goes for most people. In 1990, 25% of people had college degrees. This has now grown by 10% in the last 25 years. So it's not, everybody knows you need to get more education. So most people who are able are getting more education. So now everyone's getting more educated. So in terms of competitive advantage for getting jobs, it's not there in the same way that it was in 1990. So that's part of it. So declining income, the necessity for education, which means you spend longer in school, and some other things, which I'll talk about what those other things are, economically speaking. This has led to declining net worth for the Millennial Generation. The average millennial is worth 56% of what a baby boomer was at the same stage in life. So, think where you were at 29. Your net worth at 29 is, if you are older, if you're a baby boomer, if you're in that generation or older, your net worth when you were at 29 is twice that of someone who's currently a 25-year-old. The average 29-year-old is worth, that's red, minus $2,000 in the US today. At 30, it's about when people start breaking even. This is people who are going to college and working. They're 29 years old and working with college degrees, but they are paying off things, right? Things that you have to now pay off, right? So there are reasons why there's declining net worth. Of course, I mentioned declining income. Later start of earning. Why?
They're going to school.
They're going to school. Why are they going to school? Because they have to. I'm switching back and forth. People who are in this age group, right, start jobs later because they need to go to school. And this also means when people begin working, they have greater loan debt. Loan debt, between 2003 and 2016, loan debt doubled, and it doesn't seem to be slowing down. The average for a undergraduate graduates with $37,000 in debt. So if you're older, if you went to college and you're in your 50s and 60s, how much debt did you have when you graduated from college? Any? Here in California, I mean, it used to be fantastic, right? Like, it was very cheap to go to school in California, and that has changed dramatically. So again, the point here is dramatic change. So if you are in a religious organization, and you are older, and you have younger members, and you want to think about them, or if you are younger and you want to think about other people your age, these are things to pay attention to. The expectations are different by generation. Again, part of my motivation for this talk is I get very tired of reading, on comment sections on the internet, which I know I'm asking for it. People saying, "Oh, these millennials, they're entitled. They just need to get out there and work." And the people who I know who's writing this. It's older people, probably men, and probably a good chance they're white, right? People who are coming from a background where things were very different. The things you had access to, if you're part of that demographic, makes you think that everybody has access to those things. Let's see. One thing I want to add very briefly is another comment I really get sick of hearing, especially because I teach in the humanities, is people who get on the internet and say, well, it's because everyone's majoring in English and identity studies, blah, 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 right? Somehow it's because everyone who's going to college now is majoring in the humanities That's their own fault. They need to major in STEM, and therefore they'll make more money. The percentage of people majoring in the humanities since the 60s has been going like this. I teach very few religion majors. I teach very few English majors. I teach a lot of people who are in pre-professional degrees, doing accounting, nursing, physical therapy, teaching. A lot of people have moved into those fields because that's a clear path to a career, to a job. So the notion that people are getting more educated but they're choosing the wrong degrees, that is also false. So this generation, the generation of millennials, is more educated. They're more educated in skills-based education. They're earning less and they carry more debt than previous generations. So here's two takeaways. Millennials did not create their economic conditions. Their parents did. So if you're in your 60s and you're sitting there on your couch blaming the millennials, you need to look in the mirror. Okay. Especially if you are in demographics that have had a lot of privilege and access, right? Male, more white. Secondly, and this is where it comes back to specific challenges for BCA and other churches. The millennials will not be able to give as much money to temples as their parents. It's simply not possible. Their net worth is declining. Rents are going up. I live in Tacoma. I just read a news story today that we're second in the country for increases in rents. Tacoma. If you haven't been to Tacoma, it's kind of analogous to Oakland. It is to Seattle, although farther away and with worse transportation options, what Oakland is to San Francisco. That's Tacoma. And rents are getting crazy. So if you are in charge of a temple or connected to the budget in any way, you need to be prepared for this. The money you have now, you need to think about how that money will see you through, how that money will serve your communities going forward. If you are 25 and 30 and you are in leadership positions in your temple, the same. This is not just for people who are in older generations. Anyone who's thinking about the future of religious organizations, BCA temples, what you have, that's kind of the nest egg you've got to work with. Be wise with it, because it's not. And anyone who's worked on membership, budgets, accounting for temples, right, knows this is a fact. Incomes are declining, right? So this is something to pay attention to. But I really stress the first one, right? I really stress that first point. Okay, so that's the economic piece. I promise at the end I try to end on a hopeful note. I am very hopeful about the Millennial Generation, having spent a lot of time with them over the last 7 years of teaching. It's a generation that is dynamic. They understand the challenges they face as a generation. Many of them are working very hard despite these kind of headwinds that they face. They're creative, they're educated, they're intellectual, they're passionate, and so there is a lot going on in the Millennial Generation that is positive. The overall economic situation of the United States is not one of them. Cultural context. So there's a couple other things to pay attention to. In cultural context, there are three I'm going to talk about. Changing demographics. Decline of civic organizations. And these are nationwide. This is not just Buddhist issues. And decline in religious affiliation. Again, I don't think this is going to be surprising to all of you, but I just want to lay it out with some data points so you have something concrete to think about. Changing demographics. As I noted before, America is approaching a time where it's majority-minority. This makes some people very uncomfortable, right, in the white population particularly. I am not one of those people, and I don't think it matters, because there's nothing, like, despite some foolish ideas, there's really nothing that can be done to reverse this. America is going to become increasingly multiracial, multi-ethnic. That is our future. I think in California, you're already way ahead of the curve. Hawaii is even further ahead of the curve in that. I think other parts of the country are not as far ahead of that. I mean, both my parents are from Montana. That's still a very white state. And there's still fear and misunderstanding about what this means. Specifically for the BCA, which is historically a Japanese American institution, intermarriage is something that needs to be paid attention to. Although, again, probably nobody here is surprised by this. Japanese Americans, of Asian American groups, Japanese Americans have the highest rate of out-group marriage. The lowest rate is Indian and South Asian Americans. That's the lowest rate of out-group marriage. But among Japanese Americans, 55% of Japanese Americans who are getting married now married to someone who's not Asian. And another 9% get married to someone who's Asian but who does not identify as Japanese or Japanese American. Right, so this is changing things, right? We have, at our temple in Tacoma, our Dharma school is mostly biracial kids. Right? And so that's our present. I think it's the future for any temples that, oh, thank you so much.
When did this statistic start from the 55%?
This is right. This is of marriages right now. I think this was done maybe 2010. It's a Pew Forum survey. So I mean, there are some challenges to the Pew Forum methodology, but I think it's probably a pretty good figure. But this is the recent figures. Yeah. So this is going to change what Japanese America looks like. Right? It's already changing it. It's definitely changing it in Tacoma. We also see later marriage. This is a change in demographics. And this is connected to, a lot of these things are all interconnected, right? Later start to earning, later purchasing of homes, later ending of education, like finishing of education, and later marriage. They all kind of go hand in hand. Here's a statistic. This one is from, I think this just came out in 2016. 26% of millennials married when they were between the ages of 18 and 32. That's a little more than half of baby boomers. I think because the millennial generation is still younger, and because demographers think it's going to be later marriage, not less marriage. But we haven't kind of hit that point yet, so it's unclear. But this means people's family situation is different. That means fewer children. It also connects with another thing. A third of millennials live with their parents. And I see. I definitely saw it. Like when I gave this talk at the North Coast Convention, I saw a lot of them. On both sides. I saw the parents going. This is a reality. I think. Do I have the data point up here? No, I deleted it. This is the highest it's been since the 1880s. Yeah. The 1880s is the last time this many people between 25 and 34. But I mean, 1880s, right? Like people were getting married at 16, right? Like, I mean, very different than it is today. And so the point I made at the conference, which I will make again, which again, I'm probably preaching to the choir, is there is a pernicious and persistent idea in U.S. culture that when someone turns 18, they should leave home. And I'll say what I said at the convention, which is, this is a modern invention and of the West, and more of the white West. Right? The idea that people are 18 and suddenly they're on their own, that's only possible when you have certain economic conditions. In most of the world, this does not happen. Even in Europe, Spaniards live with their parents well into their 30s, right, on average, until marriage. Right? This is a common setup in traditional cultures around the world. So the idea that when you're 18, it is shameful to not leave home is something that really came about post-World War II in the United States, and it's because of economic necessity and other reasons, it's an idea that's going away. So please, and I'll say this, I said it at the convention, please do not shame your children, your friends, your grandchildren, if they are living with their parents. Okay? It's really easy to just kind of say, oh, you're living with your parents. Like I think it's an Aflac commercial, right? There's a guy skiing, and the scene starts, and he's like laying there with a broken leg. And the medics come and like, oh yeah, this is moving back in with his parents. And there's this kind of groan from the audience, you know. This is something that is changing. Actually, I don't know how this is going to play out, but I think this data point might strengthen some elements of BCA culture. Right? I've noticed there's a couple people who graduated from high school, so they got out of Dharma school, and then a couple years, and they didn't come to Temple for a while. And then like 3 years later, they started coming back with their parents, because they're still living at home. But they're now kind of adults, and they decided, I'm going to go back to Temple. I don't know what that means. I think there's an opportunity there, especially if the BC is open to that, right? And maybe it is. Maybe that's why this is happening. But this is a possible moment of strength, right? This is, again, like, don't look at this as a negative thing. This is just what it is, and it could be a possible place where religion, where Buddhism in particular, can strengthen. Yeah.
Do you have
Yes.
any data about the movement of that generation in terms of, you know, we kind of stick around the same geographical area versus, it seems that that generation's more mobile.
The most recent data I've seen from the last year is that they're moving less. They're actually moving less. I thought so too. I thought the kind of, until I started digging, and I was like, that can't be right.
And then they stay in other areas.
They may, yeah, that first move, they may end up staying, but they move from place to place less than previous generations. Partly because, and that data actually includes like moving from house to house and apartment to apartment. And I think that people can't necessarily afford that. So that may be part of it. But that's a good point. People leaving the city where they're from. Yeah. But at least a third of them are not. Right? Then I'm sorry, I'm not trying to other younger folks in the room. I'm trying to talk abstractly about an entire generation. Okay, so that was changing demographics. Now I want to talk briefly about decline of civic organizations in the United States. Let's see. Especially as it relates to cultural difference versus generational difference. I'm white, and at the Tacoma Temple, I was talking with one of the older members, and I'm on the board, and we were talking about kind of falling donations and things. And one of the older members say, well, you know, it's people who are raised in the temple have a certain attitude toward financial donation and pitching in with obon and sukiyaki and chicken fundraiser and stuff, right? And people who don't come from that culture, and at our temple that's people who are not Japanese American, don't get that, right? So it's a specifically kind of Japanese American thing to be kind of a booster in your local temple. Right? And I thought about that. I thought, you know, I mean, I didn't grow up in a temple, but my grandfather was Catholic, And he would have fit right in at a BCA temple. He sang in the choir, he like helped out at every event, he gave lots of money, he was always there like cleaning and helping and fixing stuff. And so I think what is being captured here is actually it's a change that's happening generationally. It's not necessarily a culture clash between the values of Japanese Americans who've grown up in the BCA and people who have not, Japanese American or people who aren't Japanese American, who didn't grow up in the temples. This connects to a trend that has been going on, and most sociologists agree it's happening. There is some kind of pushback because it's scholarship and there's always dissenting voices. This has to do with, particularly a lot of this is drawn from Robert Putnam's book, Bowling Alone. Has anybody read this? Here? The subtitle is something like The Decline of Civic Organization in the United States. So using lots of data, he basically argued that since the 1960s, voluntary civic organizations, and this includes religious organizations, but it's much broader, membership in those have been declining steadily. So over a period of 50 years. Here's a couple of the once great organizations. You might recognize some of these names. The Freemasons, the Eagles, the Elks, the Junior League, the League of Women Voters, the Sons of Norway. So I gave this talk near Tacoma, right? You probably don't have Sons of Norway. You might, I don't know. We have a pretty vibrant, or we did. It's like 6 people now, but it was very vibrant mid-century. If you've been seeing declines in your in the Fujinkai, in the BWA, right? All of these organizations are what sociologists would call civic organizations. Now, he has some theories about why this is happening. Increased commute times, television, his revised version, internet, throws that in there. I'm not exactly sure if he's on target with that. But I can tell you, my own grandfather was an elk, an eagle, a lion. He was involved with, he wasn't a Freemason because he was Catholic. That's no good. And he was not in the League of Women Voters. And he was also not Norwegian, so he wouldn't have been in. But he was in like all different kinds of organizations. The JACL, that's another one that I mentioned. And I was like, the JACL is declining, and people in the audience with JACL are like, So this is a broad trend in the United States, and it's a challenge. I don't have an answer to how we overcome this challenge, but it's a real challenge facing religious and other organizations. In the United States, we join less than we used to. We give less money, we give less of our time to these kinds of voluntary organizations.
Are you talking about millennials, or you say we?
Everybody. Since the 60s. The participation in this has been declining. And maybe it's probably partly generational. Some older members are passing away and they're not being replaced. But it's even within generations. Like my father, this is so that my Catholic grandfather is my mom's dad. My father, his family was like Freemasons, like seriously Freemason. And my father, who's a baby boomer, like went through the the YBA of Freemasonry, and then sorry, and then like just stopped doing it. And he's a baby boomer, and a lot of that generation kind of stopped participating. So I think it's both a generational shift, but it's also within generations people are not doing it. The title of the book comes from this observation. Robert Putnam says, the number of bowling leagues in the United States has declined dramatically in the last 3 decades, but the number of people who bowl has not. So more people are now bowling alone, right? Or they're bowling in ad hoc groups with smaller groups of friends. They don't have the matching jackets. They maybe don't organize charity events. So this is actually, I think this trend points to something larger, which I'm very depressed about in American civic and public life. But I won't go into that because we've already had enough depressing stuff. But this is a real decline. So especially if you are a temple where you're having newer members, right, who didn't grow up in the temples, whatever their background, if they didn't grow up in the temple, their not understanding of what it means to be involved in a civic or religious organization may be part of that, but it might also be part of the general cultural shift that's been happening in the United States for the last 50 years, away from civic organizations, of which the BCA is one. Again, the high point was in the 1960s. All right, I need to speed this up. Okay, sorry. And then, of course, with this decline of religious affiliation. Again, this is going to not be a surprise to anybody here. I'll bring news back from the Lutheran Church, which is the church that owns my university, and which I've learned things about. I was not raised Lutheran. I don't know much about Lutheranism. But as a mainline Protestant organization, so it's not an evangelical association or organization, as a mainline Protestant organization, its kind of demographic changes and its numbers and the challenges it's facing are very analogous to those facing the BCA. And they're going through the same things. One of these is the fact that there's an increasing number of U.S. adults who mark none under religious affiliation on forms and questions. They're called the nuns. And their number is on the rise. If you go to the Pacific Northwest, where I'm from, it's twice as high. And it's higher the younger you go. So when I go into a classroom to teach about religion, I can assume that fewer than half of my students have ever had any experience inside a religious tradition. Demographically speaking, people who are raised in a religious tradition, some of them will leave. People who are not raised in a religious tradition, almost none of them join a religious tradition. It's a one-way thing. So far. Yeah, these things could change. Their numbers are growing. Let's see, did I miss something? Okay, so those are the three things I wanted to talk about. Changing demographics, decline of civic organizations, and decline in religious affiliation across all people in the United States. With the exception, the decline is slower among African Americans. That is the only group broken out that has a slower decline of religious affiliation. All other ethnic and racial groups show a very large decline in religiosity. And that is both within generations and generation to generation. So now I'm going to move on to, so that's all the background. That's the conditioned arising part, right? These are all of the background things that are going on, that millennials are living in. But what are some of their attitudes? In particular, I take a lot of this information from a great report I read by Dr. Stephanie Juhas, who is at Naropa University, another Buddhist Institute of Higher Education. She was great to kind of give me permission to use some of her work, and she has a book coming out. It's an academic book, so it could be in a year or 3 years from now, but keep an eye out for her name. She mostly was studying Christian Americans, but I think a lot of what she found applies broadly. The experiences and attitudes of millennials. Okay, so I'm speaking broadly here. I'm looking at, like, if I get it wrong, let me know, like, share your thoughts and opinions about this. Millennials have much higher exposure to diversity and global cultures through the internet, through their neighbors, through film, through all kinds of different media. As a result of this, the millennial generation tends to blur boundaries. They're more comfortable with kind of multiple elements of identity, creative usage of traditions, the notion that you need to be a part of one religious tradition and follow all of the pieces of that is not as strong among millennials. Again, it might be stronger among people who are here in a Buddhist temple on a Thursday night, right? So again, if you're thinking, well, that's not my experience, yeah, that's true. You could say, well, but it is everybody I went to high school with, right? Or I'm wrong, and that's also entirely possible. Multiple belonging, right? Belonging to multiple identities, right? And this includes, we have seen a kind of an increase in the number of identities that we value as a society that we think are important to honor and respect. Right? So racial identities, ethnic identities, sex identity, gender identity, sexuality, right? Like religious identity, that's actually, as a society, we're not as respecting of that. And I could get into that in a second, but I'll put that to the side. There's also, paradoxically, a desire not to be categorized, right? So this whole thing, if some of you, again, like if you're saying, yeah, well, that doesn't describe me, right? Yes, yeah, exactly, right? Like, this is something that is, the notion that your identity will be fixed to a civic organization, right? That's something that is changing, right? People are more interested in having a fluid identity. I'm into these kind of things, but this doesn't make me who I am. Okay. I would say there's a Buddhist kind of angle to that, which I'll get to in a second. Millennials have a higher distrust of institutions than previous generations. Varieties of institutions, political institutions, religious institutions, media institutions. Right, these are higher among younger people, this kind of sense of distrust. Millennial and religious affiliation, no surprise. Right, this is the nuns. So a high score means lower religion affiliation. Here's the nuns. We don't have a lot of time to track it, but you can see it kind of goes up even among generations. So here we have the silent generation, Boomers, Gen X, Millennials. The most important thing to note is by generation it decreases. So each generation is less religious than the preceding generation. A third of millennials are nuns. Again, it's probably twice as high where I live, so it's probably 2/3 of my students are nuns. Some aggressively so. They dislike, so here's something, they dislike religious judgmentalism and hypocrisy. And I think this is a challenge, because human beings are fallible. And so religious institutions are fallible. And I think one thing that is often talked about is that millennials have a very acute detector for BS. Right? Because they grew up in a world heavily saturated with media and advertising. Right? And rather than turn millennials into a generation of sheep, it's actually made them very savvy readers of message and situation. And so if you're a religion that is highly judgmental or hypocritical in some way, you're not going to fare very well among millennials. So I think that's actually a good thing for BCA. They dislike intrusive proselytizing. Again, I think this is something that BCA doesn't do, right? In the United States, membership in religious organizations is correlated with marriage and having kids in particular. Sociologists are not agreed on what the rationale, what the mechanism is, but I can tell you at our temple, in January of every year, we have all the new members stand up at the front who've joined over the past year. And it's mostly people with Dharma school age kids. That's like the majority. And then there's some like oddballs like my wife and myself. Reverend Kobata, did you have a question?
I was just wondering, geographically, are there any contrasts over these?
I didn't break this down as much. I'm sure there are big contrasts. Like Bay Area and rural Mississippi are probably quite different. Yeah. Okay, what do they want? Right, so what do millennials want? Well, the first thing I'd say is ask a millennial, right? I think you're fortunate here at IBS to have a lot of younger people coming through your doors. As younger people, you're fortunate to have a place like this, which is intellectually stimulating, where you can come and approach Buddhism in a rich way. And so I'm just going to offer a few observations of millennials in general about religion from the work of 7U, US. There is a high commitment to altruism and diversity. Diversity as a good in of itself, right? And this is diversity in the sense of a positive being together, right? So a kind of a positive understanding of diversity is taken for granted. There is a seeking for meaning in life. Right? So despite the notion, and it's weird, like it's one of these things where you get both sides in the media. You hear people saying, the millennials are all just self-serving careerists, right? Or, oh, they're all lazy. Right? Well, they can't both be right. That doesn't make any sense. Millennials, right? Like, you've got to work hard because of the economic situation. But that doesn't mean they aren't looking for meaning in life, right? Younger people are looking for meaning and value and rich content. So, Dharma talks with rich content, right? Which can be a challenge. I occasionally give Dharma talks in my temple, and it can be a challenge, right? You want to talk to everybody, but you want to give a message, right? You want to be with people in the Dharma in a way that's, fulfilling and is rich, right? Many millennials are spiritual but not religious. And often when people say this, they mean Christianity. That's their model. I'm spiritual, but I'm not Christianity, right? Well, they'll say religious because this is a slogan. Right? But I think when I really press students on this, millennials, by and large, seek experiences, not things. I think this is a very healthy adaptation to the economic reality that you all face, right? You're living in an economic situation where you're not going to have a lot of stuff compared to your parents. But that's changed the values of people. You know what? It's not about accumulating things. It's about accumulating experiences and understanding and enriching your lives. Right? Strong awareness of change and the fluidity of the self. And this is so Buddhist, I think. Right? I think as a generation, you all millennials, right, like, you've experienced such great change in a short period of time. And you've experienced the reality of different identities, right? People around you with multiple kinds of identities that are important to them, that are important to you. And I think there's a greater sense of the fluidity of the self. And this is eminently Buddhist, right? I think Buddhism can speak to this. I think Buddhism does speak to this. And there is still a tendency to associate around shared interests and ideals, but these associations may happen in unconventional ways. According to older generations, it might happen at game nights at your local bar. It might happen on the internet. I don't know. That's the only two I can think of off the top of my head. Ask somebody younger where these things happen. Okay, so I'm sorry I went a little longer than I had thought I was going to go. But here's some discussion. These are the points I'm going to raise, and then I have two questions. And I'm going to moderate, but I'm really not the focus of the conversation. We are the focus together of the conversation. So I will add a few points, but then I hope that everyone will feel free to kind of share. Strengths of the BCA as I see it, right? As a relative newcomer to the BCA, but a long-time participant in Buddhism in America and a scholar of religion, the BCA is not overly dogmatic and does not proselytize. That's a win. There is a strong element of community. That was one of the things that attracted me. After participating in Zen for many years, I found that experience somewhat arid. especially in terms of interpersonal interaction. Doing together rather than fixed identity. Openness to diversity. I've definitely experienced that at the Tacoma Temple, both diversity in the concrete, right, of specific people and their diverse manifestations, but also in the abstract, right, an abstract kind of theological, Buddhological commitment to all humans as equally saved by Amida, right? That's a bedrock kind of theological thing that I think meets values that a lot of younger people share. And Dharma school. Dharma school, Dharma school, Dharma school. Again, like I said, like who comes to our temple? Newcomers. They usually have kids, right? And as this generation, as the generation of millennials, as you age, and as your lives become more economically stable, many of your generation will start to get married and have kids. Right? Like I said, I'm 42. All my friends from high school had kids like 5 years ago. Like all of them. Like they're all like within the same year. You know, they were 37 and they all had kids. Right? And now those kids are Dharma school age. Right? And if these people don't want to take their kids to a Christian church, where else can you go? Right? I think the Baha'i have some cool stuff for kids, but like, I mean, the BCA has been doing this a long time. You all know how this works. You know what to do. So I think that's a strength as well that I see as a relative newcomer. So that's my talk. We do have 25 some more minutes. And again, my hope is that everyone here feels welcome to talk. In order to get you going, I've got 2 questions for you. What do you want your temple to look like in 20 years? So 2037. It's too far away. We'll have a different president by then, like several different presidents down the road, right? I believe in change, but I don't think it's going to happen that fast that the United States will no longer exist. Like I think there'll still be, I think the A in BCA will still refer to this country. What will you do to make that happen? What's it going to look like in 20 years? 20 years from now. So think about how old you are now. Add 20. Think about what that's going to look like. And so that's the question I leave for everybody here. And everyone here is at a different place in life and has something to offer to that. Thank you very much.